Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today to discuss our draft decision paper on better protections for life support customers in Victoria. So my name is Jess Young and I'm one of the commissioners here at the ESC. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which all the lands and wherever you are today. So for me, that's the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal people who might be on the call today. So thank you again for taking time to participate in this information session. The life support reforms are really key to the ESC's strategic plan, and they really reflect our strategic plan. We want essential services that are accessible and inclusive to all customers, and we want systems within those essential services to be resilient. Energy is essential to all of us, but for customers who rely on energy to sustain their lives, being prepared for emergencies and being notified about outages is even more critical. Our life support registers serve two purposes. They deliver consumer protections that ensure that customers can maintain their equipment so that it's working when they need it, but they also guide the emergency services in the welfare checks that happen during prolonged power outages. We've had a few of those in Victoria in recent years, and we've learnt that when the registers are not properly maintained, life support customers may not get the help that they need in a timely manner. So the focus of our reforms is to improve Victoria's life support regulatory framework in a way that safeguards consumer protections and delivers better data for emergency agencies so that they can triage customers. In looking for this balance, we've been very deliberate in proposing reforms that will not increase the burden on life support customers themselves. We also want the right incentives to maintain consumer protections while giving support during emergencies. We do acknowledge that these reforms are not costless and they are going to impact retailers and exempt sellers in the new responsibilities for this life support process. But we believe that these parties are best placed to hold these responsibilities because they've got that closer relationship with customers. We've been working really closely with the Australian Energy Market Commission, who are also undertaking a parallel review, and they're here today in this session, I believe. So we've tried really hard to harmonise the rules where we can and propose similar reforms so that we can increase consistency across jurisdictions. So we believe that this is going to deliver better outcomes for consumers, for energy businesses, and for medical practitioners in their role in this as well. So our team is going to talk in detail about the changes that we're proposing as set out in our draft report, our draft decision, and we welcome your feedback to close any gaps and make any improvements that are going to help us to deliver a process that's more responsive and more effective for those who need it the most. Our team is also ready and willing to meet you on a one-on-one basis if you'd prefer to engage with us that way, and I do encourage you to reach out and contact them if you'd like to schedule a meeting. Now, we are going to have a Q&A session after we hear about the detail from the team, and I'm going to facilitate questions and working with the team. So I'll now pass back to John Paul, who's going to do some housekeeping. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jess, and good afternoon, everyone. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today. I'm in Melbourne, so for me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect also to any Aboriginal people who might be joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jean-Paul Gisovat. I'm one of the managers of the Regulatory Reform team here at the Energy Division in the Essential Services Commission. I would like to thank you for your engagement on the review to date. It's great to see you all of here. We really value your feedback and the opportunity to share our proposed reforms. Before we present our proposed reforms, just some housekeeping. We have the team leading the review here who's going to guide you through the reforms. But before that, please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. We'll be answering questions at the end. And if you have any questions during the presentations, please pop them into the Q&A sections on Teams. And by the end, we're going to go through all of those questions. You're also welcome, of course, to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question at the Q&A time. And if by any reason you cannot see the Q&A button, you might like to quickly rejoin the meeting and open this webinar in your browser, and that should fix it. But if not, you can also just use the microphone and ask a question. We ask everyone to contribute respectfully and constructively to the discussion. And just a reminder that the session is being recorded and that we might publish it online on our webpage. Next slide, please. Very briefly, the agenda for today is as follows. We are going to first provide some background on why we are reviewing life support protections in Victoria. We're going to present the key consumer harms and the key issues that we have identified that this review is aiming to address. We're going to provide an overview of our consultation paper that we released in July last year, and also the feedback we have received to date after that. And after that, we're going to present the proposed reforms that we included in the draft decision paper that is currently open for consultation. As I was saying before, after that, we're going to have an allocated time for questions at the end. And after the questions, we're going to present next steps of the review. With that, I'll pass it on to Alex from my team, who's going to present the next section. Thanks very much.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. So here we're going to start with a slide that many of you are probably already familiar with. We've used it a few times, but it lays out sort of the background to these reforms. So the key triggers for our review of the life support framework were Victorian network reviews that followed the 2021 and 2024 prolonged outages and the Victorian government responses to those reviews. Now, these reviews found that life support customers were not receiving the support they needed during prolonged power outages, and this was mainly due to the inaccuracy of life support registers. Now, the network outage review suggested that the government try to implement a national approach to life support, as well as work with the Energy Charter to have better clarity for customers, practitioners, and energy businesses. Now, in addressing this recommendation, we have been working closely with the Australian Energy Market Commission, who is, as mentioned, here with us today. Now, as many of you likely know, the Energy Charter worked with SA Power Networks and Essential Energy to submit a rule change proposal to the AEMC based upon their Better Together initiative. We have taken that as a starting point, though we have substantially reframed the reforms in our response to feedback, as we will discuss throughout this presentation. Can we just progress to the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of the broad ways we're considering these reforms is that we're trying to help address 5 broad customer harms. So firstly, emergency services are struggling to triage customers appropriately. This means important, limited resources are not used as efficiently as possible during emergencies. Now, while we do not regulate emergency services, life support data can support those agencies with that triage process during emergencies. Now, this in turn leads to the next, which is to delayed support for customers during prolonged power outages. Additionally, there have been instances when family members of life support users who have passed away continue to receive notifications related to life support and even get life support registration packages delivered to them, which can be very distressing. Customers also need new medical confirmation forms every time they change retailers or move interstate, which is a burden. And lastly, customers can miss important notifications because they cannot choose their preferred communication method for life support notifications, or because they can't nominate secondary contacts. Next slide. So we see these harms as stemming from a set of interrelated key issues. So we see there are issues with inconsistent, and inaccurate data in registers, inconsistent deregistration practices, unclear or inconsistent medical confirmation forms and processes, and inconsistent practices for collecting and using secondary or preferred contact methods. We believe that by addressing these issues, we can help mitigate the previously mentioned harms, noting that a lot of these issues primarily revolve around inconsistent practices. So we released a consultation paper in July of 2025, which contained most of the proposals in the rule change request submitted to the AEMC. This rule change request acknowledges the inaccuracy of life support registers as a problem to be addressed and proposes changes to improve outcomes for life support customers. Now, there are two key matters that we think are worth highlighting from the rule change request. One key proposal was to introduce a distinction between critical life support equipment, which is required to sustain life, and assistive life support equipment, which is aimed at improving the quality of life for a customer. Now, this would enable distributors to more easily identify customers with critical needs. Putting this in the Victorian context, this would enable distributors to provide emergency agencies with data to support said agencies with their triage and the prioritization of customers during prolonged power outages. The second key aspect of the rule change we want to highlight involves the proposals to increase the accuracy of registers. These are covered on the slide under the registration and deregistration topic. The proposed changes include mandatory deregistration, both at the customer's request and if no medical confirmation is received, a cap on registration attempts without medical confirmation, and a four-yearly medical confirmation update. Now, based on the feedback we received, we moved away from these proposed changes that we initially consulted on. As we will discuss in later slides, we are now proposing alternative approaches that we believe will deliver the same outcome sought through the rule change request, while still providing strong customer protections. The most important outcomes we're seeking are the ability for emergency services to triage customers with more significant health needs, and a more accurate life support registers generally. So here is a snapshot of the written feedback we received on the consultation paper and the options I highlighted in the previous slide. So 43% of the feedback was from industry participants and 33% from consumer advocates. We also received feedback from medical bodies and the government. Now, we did receive diverging feedback on key aspects of reforms. Again, especially those I just highlighted earlier. So this is a bit of an oversimplification of the nature of feedback we received, but to briefly summarize, most consumer groups did not support the key aspects of these reforms. They were concerned that the proposals would lead to significant burden on life support customers who already experience significant vulnerability due to their health condition. Energy industry members were broadly supportive of these changes. Some retailers were, however, concerned that the critical and assistive distinction and the mandatory deregistration could increase the risk of wrongful disconnection. We also consulted with bodies representing medical practitioners. While they supported trying to distinguish between customers for better triage, they did raise the issue that distinguishing by equipment type could be difficult, as a lot of that largely depends on a customer's specific circumstances. That is, that what might be critical for some customers might not be critical for others, and vice versa. So, after the submission period closed, we engaged with a range of stakeholders to clarify their feedback and test the revised approach that we will cover here today. This included one-to-one meetings with several groups and joint workshops with with ourselves and the AEMC, as well as distributors and retailers' peak industry bodies. Now, these consultations actually allowed us to redesign the proposed reforms to help address key concerns from stakeholders, while still ensuring that life support registers are made more accurate and provide more useful data for emergency services during prolonged outages. I'll now pass over to Yara, who'll go into a bit more depth on the proposed reforms.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. I'm Yara Gonzaga, and I'm a Senior Regulatory Officer in the reform team at the Commission. And I will talk about the reforms in our draft decision paper. So as Alex highlighted, the key reforms that we're proposing in the decision paper are different to what we put forward in the consultation paper. And this updated approach is aimed at addressing feedback that we received from stakeholders throughout the consultation paper. We had in mind, when coming up with this alternative approach for each of these key reforms, to deliver a balance between a register that is easy for customers to get into on one hand, and on the other hand, that is also as accurate as possible to deliver good data for our emergency agencies. These changes that I'm going to talk about in the next slide, probably worth highlight that they apply to both retailers and exempt retailers, distributors and exempt distributors, and also across both electricity and gas. So I might refer to retailers or distributors as I go across, just for short, but they also apply to exempt persons. This slide contains a summary of what is in our draft decision paper. We decided to use the same structure throughout this presentation so that it's easier for everyone to go through and understand the proposals. We have key 4 themes in our consultation paper, which you can see on the slides. So the first one is support for emergency agencies. And in this first bucket of reforms, we have the introduction of a new life-threatening flag and some updated data recording requirements. Under the second bucket, registration and deregistration, we are proposing to change the responsibility for life support processes to retailers. So currently, this responsibility is shared between retailers and distributors. And the second bucket is contains some updated deregistration requirements. So for the third set of reforms, the proposal is to create a standard medical confirmation form and also to introduce yearly check-ins with customers. And on the fourth one and final one, we have some improved communication. And this, it just involves requirements for businesses to enable customers to both nominate a secondary contact person to receive notification, life support notifications, and also to use a customer's preferred contact method of communication when reaching out for life support matters. So the reform under this last theme will essentially be the same as what we put forward in the consultation paper. The other 3 were considerably modified since the initial consultation period, as I said, to address stakeholder feedback. Next slide, please. So here it is just our attempt to showcase how the issues and consumer harms that Alex discussed earlier relate to each of the reform topics that we have on the left-hand side. So on the right side of the table, we have the issues that led to this review and each of the themes of the reforms that we are proposing, as I said, on the left-hand side. So the issues in the slide, starting with inconsistent and inaccurate data in the registers, led to the changes that we are proposing in relation to support for emergency agencies, the inconsistent registration practices in the next row, flowing to our proposed approach to registration and registration, and unclear and inconsistent medical confirmation forms and inconsistent communication practices leading respectively to medical confirmation form and improved communication topics. In a way, all these issues on this table contribute to inaccurate registers, which is sort of the main issue that we're trying to address with the reforms. Next slide, please. So now moving on to the specific changes. Here we have two of the main reforms that we are proposing in relation to support for emergency agencies. The first one is to introduce a life-threatening condition system flag. And what we're hoping is that this will support emergency agencies to identify people who are more likely to need support during emergencies. So this flag replaces the critical and assistive distinction that we consulted on initially in the consultation paper. And I think importantly to highlight here is that the flag focuses on the condition, not on the life support equipment, which was something that was important that we heard through consultation. And also the sole purpose of this flag is to support emergency agencies triage during emergency events. Consumer protections will remain exactly the same as they are, regardless of whether a customer has a life-threatening condition or is flagged as having a life-threatening condition or not. And this was deliberately done to address consumer advocates' feedback on the consultation paper, seeking to prevent an undesirable differentiation between someone's critical and assistive conditions, or sort of creating a tiered type of customers, critical and assistive customers. Also relevant to highlight here that retailers will only be able to flag someone as having a life-threatening condition if the customer provides them with a medical confirmation form that does indicate that their condition is life-threatening. So it's not going to be for retailers to decide upon registration if a customer has or has not a life-threatening condition. So in other words, customers without medical confirmation will not be flagged as having a life-threatening condition under what we are proposing here. And this was done to address some feedback from retailers who were concerned about having to assess the criticality of a life support customer before having received medical confirmation form. There are slides further down this presentation that are specific about medical confirmation form template, but now I'm moving to the second part of the slide that is about new data that retailers need to capture and pass on through distributors through B2B processes. And then distributors will also pass that on to emergency agencies. So currently, our regulation, particularly ERCOP, requires that retailers and distributors capture the date from which the customer needs life support, when medical confirmation is received, the date when medical confirmation is received, the date of the registration, and also record life support communications exchanged with the customer. We are proposing to retain all these requirements, and in addition to this, we are also requiring retailers to record whether the customer has a life-threatening condition, the life support equipment used by the life support resident, and the contact details and preferred communication methods of both the life support customer and their secondary contact. Next slide, please. Our goals with these reforms, as we have mentioned from the outset, is primarily to provide better data for emergency agencies so that people who need can have appropriate support during prolonged power outages. We know that climate change is already exacerbating natural disasters and also increasing the likelihood of compounding weather events, which can lead to more regular, more frequent power outages. And we do acknowledge that many stakeholders have suggested that a central register would be the best model to capture customers with vulnerabilities, and this includes live support customers. However, I think in the absence of a central register, we are using what's available to us right now to help emergency agencies to make more informed decisions about triage and resource allocation. So providing emergencies with better data will likely reduce the time that they currently spend data cleaning, and also increase the ability to provide faster and more targeted support to the customers who need the most. Next slide, please. So next theme, here is our new registration and deregistration approach. We are proposing under this theme that retailers would be the sole responsible entity for managing all life support processes. And this includes registration, medical confirmation, and deregistration. What we're expecting here is that by having a sole entity responsible for these processes, will deliver role clarity, which was a common theme that we heard in a lot of the submissions that we received. And it will also increase accountability. So the reason why we chose retailers to own these processes and not distributors is primarily twofold. Firstly, we believe that retailers are the interface with the energy market, with customers, and they do already have the systems in place to account for this role. Secondly, retailers are already currently responsible for around 95% of the registration based on like data that we received both from retailers and from distributors. So flip distributors would have had a pretty big impact on current practices. So we still believe, despite like this change in ownership of the registration processes, we still believe that it is extremely important to have a no wrong door approach to registration. So what we are proposing is to enable customers to request to register either through retailers or distributors. What this means, because you may be thinking like it is too confusing since retailers are going to be the owners of the processes. What I mean by that is that if the request for registration happens through the distributor would be required to pass that on to retailers. And the retailers will then register the customer. So the request can happen through the distributors, but the registration itself is still done by retailers. This means that protections will only start from when the retailer registers the customer, but we believe that is a small delay that will, that on balance, will support more role clarity, more accountability, and streamline the processes that we have currently. The second change on this slide is around updates to the registration requirements. So what we are proposing is that the registration would be mandatory if a customer requests to be removed from the register. However, we are proposing to maintain retailers' discretion for the registration related to lack of medical confirmation. And just want to be really clear about our intention here. The intention is not to keep people who are not medically confirmed in the register. The rationale for maintaining the discretion here is to ensure that retailers can consider customers' individual circumstances before they start the deregistration process and eventually deregister a customer. So just to give you an example, if someone lives in a remote area and relies in flying doctors for a medical appointment, they may not be able, or they may not be as able as someone who lives in the city and has easy access to medical practitioners to come up with a medical certificate, a medical confirmation form in the timelines that our codes prescribe. So this discretion around the registration is not different to the approach that we have currently in the code. So if registration remains discretionary for lack of medical confirmation, what is changing? So the new obligations that we are proposing to introduce for that specific case is that retailers would be required to follow the registration process. Currently, this is not a requirement. The registration process exists, but we do not mandate retailers to follow that, retailers or distributors to follow that. And if the retailers decide to not deregister a customer because they're taking into consideration their particular circumstances, they will need to record the reason for not doing so. Next slide, please. What we are seeking to achieve with these changes to registration and the registration processes, again, is register accuracy, and also to achieve that in a way that does not impact consumer protections and do not make easy harder for consumers to access the register or to confirm their medical condition through medical confirmation form. We believe that once this gets implemented and the registration gets more consistent across businesses, both at customer request and for lack of medical confirmation, it will start to become easier and easier for businesses to manage their registers. And we also expect this to avoid instances that were mentioned earlier in the presentation, where customers have requested the registration because, let's say, the family member relying on life support had passed away, but they still continue to receive life support notifications, and they still continue to get their doors knocked during emergencies because they have never been removed from the register. Next slide, please. So moving on to medical confirmation. Here, we are seeking to develop a standard medical confirmation form. And the intent is that it will be used in Victoria and also across the NEM jurisdictions. And we're planning to work, we will work with the Australian Energy Regulator on the design of this form. And we'll also address feedback that we received on the consultation paper around making the form simple and more accessible, particularly for like different cohorts of life support customers, and also for practitioners to easily fill it in during the limited consultation period. So this consultation will include seeking input from people with lived experience, and also broader engagement with stakeholders on the design of the form. And just highlighting here that to address feedback from guest distributors, the form will also enable practitioners to indicate whether gas is required at the premises. And we expect this to increase clarity on whether life support customer does or does not need to be registered with their gas businesses. We're also proposing that retailers undertake an yearly check-in with life support customers. The purpose of this check-in is first to identify whether life support equipment is still required. Second, to confirm customers and their secondary contact details, and to remind customers about the need to submit a medical confirmation form if they have never provided one. As per our deregistration approach, if the customer confirms that life support is not required, the retailer must then deregister this customer. If the customer still needs life support but has not provided medical confirmation form, the retailer may start a deregistration process. And again, here, a decision about whether or not to start the deregistration process will depend on the customer's personal circumstances. What we heard from energy businesses and from the Information Exchange Committee in charge of the business-to-business processes is that it would take about 18 months to implement IT system improvements for these reforms to take place. We would, however, like to start seeing data quality improvement in the register before that. And for this reason, we are proposing the transitional arrangements that you can see on the slides. And this includes a first check-in to be completed by 31st December 2026, and a second check-in to be completed between 1st January 2027 and December 2027. The first check-in, first two check-ins will focus only on confirming that customers still need life support, and will only impact customers who had been registered for more than 12 months prior to the start of the respective check-in period. This, we believe, has a great potential to deliver better data for emergency agencies and hopefully reduce their cleanup efforts during the 2026-2027 bushfire season, and also for the 2027-2028 storm and bushfire season. The reason why we decided to do that is because waiting to improve the register accuracy until the full suite of reforms are implemented would mean that we would only see improvement to data quality in mid-2028, and this would be a huge missed opportunity from an emergency management perspective. Next slide, please. So, as mentioned in the slide before, this is pretty much about data quality and data consistency, but also about making medical confirmation easier for life support customers and medical practitioners. We also expect that by having a single form across the NAM and Victoria, and also across retailers, will improve medical confirmation rates, as customers will be able to reuse their medical confirmation form without having to book a new appointment and having to wait for their appointment to happen before they can be medically confirmed. Next slide, please. So this is the last reform chapter, and this involves two reforms. First one is the ability for customers to nominate a secondary contact, and the second one to nominate their preferred communication method. We do acknowledge and understand that some business already allow for secondary contacts to be nominated, but this is not a consistent practice across the industry. And the consistency is pretty much what we're seeking with this reform. So here, consumers would be able to nominate a secondary contact either through the medical confirmation form or directly through contacting their retailers. Similarly, some businesses already reported that they do communicate with live sport customers through their preferred communication method. And this reform will ensure, again, that this practice is consistent across the industry and that businesses do use customers' preferred contact method for live support communications. Next slide, please. This one is pretty straightforward. We want to increase the chances that live support notifications get through to customers and they do so in a timely way. So that customers are more likely to act on the notifications that they receive. Next slide, please. So this is our last slide before we start the Q&A, and here we'd just like to emphasize that what represented just before is in line with what the AEMC is proposing as part of the live sport review. There are two things, though, that are slightly different in our proposals, and they are the transitional arrangements for yearly check-in that I mentioned before. We are proposing the 2 transitional check-ins, and AEMC is not. And the second one is around the start of protections when live sport customer requests to be registered through distributors. The AEMC proposes that protections start from the customer's request to the distributor, and we are proposing that they do start from registration by retailers. So distributors communicate retailers. Once retailers do register the customers, then the protections will start. So this concludes the reform part of this information session. Thank you everyone for listening.